Mogadishu, Somalia. 20 years of political, religious and clan-based violent conflict. Unsuccessful and often misguided foreign interventions. War, drought and poverty have produced one of the most dangerous and hostile environments in the world.
A failed state.
The most dangerous place in the world.
A basket case.
A safe haven for terrorists.
Endemic corruption.
A humanitarian disaster waiting to happen.
In February 2007, in an attempt to halt the seemingly unstoppable downward spiral into chaos and anarchy, the UN Security Council passed a resolution that authorised African Union member states to form a stabilisation mission for Somalia. This mission was to be known as AMISOM. The AMISOM mission is by no means near completion. The logistical support that the international community provides helps, but at the moment is but a drop in the ocean for a mission of this size.
I'm afraid this time we're going to have to stop viewing Somalia through the eyes of these conflicts and, the image of the piracy, and come to the assistance of millions of people who need help badly, seriously. Otherwise, we might end up regretting it when hundreds, or thousands of children and the weak ones begin to die in about 2, 3, 4 weeks from now. They need medication and food. We've made an appeal. While making this appeal to the international community, I'm also making the appeal, and we've done so to the African governments. They're preparing, to provide whatever assistance they can. But I'm sure those of you in the US, in Europe, have the necessary technology and the transportation and the means to fly in as quickly as possible, earlier than most other countries can.
But Mr. Rawlings, you'd accept that it's not simply a question of just flying.
Hello?
Hello, if you can hear me, we seem to be having some technical problems, but you'd accept that it's not simply a case of just flying in to come to the aid of the Somalis, even if people wanted to, bear in mind that we have the reality of Al-Shabaab on the ground, and that is an unknown quantity.
Yeah, I know. The Al-Shabaab elements are, conducting themselves in a more responsible way this time. I mean, that's the promise they've made, and I believe one of the UN agencies have had access to some of the hungry people in their areas of control. And quite frankly, we do not want to see a repeat of the irresponsibility and the indiscipline that led to America's intervention, 2 decades or so ago. And quite frankly, it's embarrassing to anyone who think they're fighting for their people. And as a result of that, I think they've sort of pulled off and are very much on the defensive and are demonstrating a more responsible, attitude towards some of the agencies that would want to provide help.
So, Mr. Rawlings,
please don't let that stand in your way.
Mr. Rawlings,
in terms of those who have been still combative, let me assure you, the African troops, the AMISOM, are dealing with that. So Mogadishu is almost a safe area now. Yes, go ahead.
Talk to me about your conversations with the transitional leadership, the political establishment there in Mogadishu, and what they said to you about their needs in dealing with this situation.
Well, what they're saying about their needs is no different than what I'm saying, honestly. I'm only adding my voice to their call as well. But, some or most of them don't speak English. I mean, the president, etc. Of course, he's been using interpreters. We met the press yesterday where he put these concerns across. He's been able to put his cabinet together, that will be put before Parliament. I believe these are some of the concerns that the American government is waiting to hear about. Yes.
And let me ask you this, because you have been to some of these internally displaced camps there in Mogadishu. You've been able to see the stuff firsthand. Describe for me what stood out for you as you went around these centers. Talk to me about what you saw. Bring that home to our viewers.
Yeah, Aisha, it's the same old heart-rending situation that we used to see 20 years ago. You know, when the senior President Bush and the world couldn't take it anymore and decided, you know, to fly in aid. That's when some of these extremists started misbehaving, and Bush had no choice but to send in his troops to do what he could. We're back to the same situation, you know, where a 5-year-old kid, in fact, I'm not even sure whether he was a boy or girl, looks like a 1.5-year-old child. I'm just talking about the cumulative degree of malnutrition, you know, that they've been caught up in over the last 2 years of famine, hardly any rain, and in the 3rd year running, no rain, and now we're saddled with the consequences of it, you know? And can you imagine some of these women, you know, with 4 children, 5 children, trekking through wherever they've come from, 200 and something kilometers. How long did it take you? 6 days, etc. But it's, and yet when you look at the resilience, the fortitude, the strength in these mothers, you know, holding onto these feeble, fragile children, as sorry as you feel for them, you cannot help but also admire, you know, their sense of courage and determination. I mean, let's do what we can.
You're clearly moved by what you saw. These are very, very difficult times for so many people there, particularly in the southern parts of Somalia, where the UN has already declared it a famine, and there in Mogadishu, where you are, where you have seen firsthand the suffering that has been going on for decades and has just been exacerbated by these conditions now on the ground, this famine and this drought.
We've been able to get across to as many governments as possible, and believe it or not, Sudan has even made a pledge, you know, to assist, and various other governments are putting together whatever medical items they can, and whatever food items they also can transport across. But I make a serious appeal to the international community, who have more than enough to share, who have the equipments and the transportation to be able to fly as early as possible, you know, food items and medical equipments into this region. But at the same time, as I say so, I know there are those, and I've said it once and I'm saying it again, there are those of us who have our prejudices against the Horn of Africa because of the piracy that's going on, because of the combative nature of the extremists in the country. But let's not allow that to blind us to the millions who are suffering on the ground and escaping into the outskirts of the cities, and the hundreds of thousands that are moved into Kenya, into Ethiopia, etc.
Tell me what you've seen.
Well, it was a very sorrowful sight this morning in the camp. The mothers and the children. I'm not sure many of them will be alive in the next week or two.
What sort of numbers are you talking about?
The figure from the UN outfit was is about 500,000. Let's even make it a quarter. Yeah, in about from about 2 weeks, 3, 4, 5 onwards, we'll be burying lots of children. You know, if we don't respond quickly, we're asking for a miracle. not from the good Lord, but from governments, from establishments, companies, corporations who have done very good business in Africa, and we still wish them, you know, good business in the future, that this is the time to also pitch in.
How far have you managed to get guarantees from the combatants that they will give free passage to aid that's coming into those beleaguered communities?
I believe they are caught in a very embarrassing situation themselves. So when they say that they will stand aside and allow free flow of medical equipment or medical supplies and food, let's take them a little serious enough. I believe one of the UN agencies has been able to testify to this, okay? And let's make the effort. We're on the ground to ensure that food supplies gets to them in those areas. Let's test it out.
The American anxiety is terrorism, that they will fuel the people that they believe are the great threat to Western interests.
Ugandan soldiers and the Burundian soldiers have taken on at great cost, so ill-equipped, you just can't believe it. It'll be difficult to send troops into a situation like that. And yet, at great cost to their lives, they're taking on the extremists and driving them out. Besides, some of the dynamics of the last few weeks, you know, affecting some of the Arab countries, has weakened them to such an extent that they're actually on the run.
Former President of Ghana, Jerry Rawlings.
As you saw from the video, we're going to be talking about a very important topic today. And we have a very important person who is going to be a spokesman for the cause today. I'd like to thank all the ambassadors who are here today. We'll be hearing from them a little bit later. I gave some initial thanks earlier on, so I'll just move forward because I think you all very quickly want to get to the main event. So I have the privilege of making an introduction. I am from Ghana myself, so the person I'm making an introduction to is somebody who I have grown up with. And I just wanted to share a few comments. He's, of course, somebody who needs no introduction, but there may be a few things that are worth bringing out. So many of you not from Ghana may not know that he's associated with being somebody who champions the cause of the common man. So in Ghana, when you hear the common man, typically there's only one person who is associated with that. He's an emblem of honesty and integrity. Again, something which in my country, if you mention that among all of the politicians, regardless of whether you're pro his policies or against his policies, one thing that almost everybody acknowledges is his honesty. Apropos of his being a man who champions the cause of the common man, if you will, I was told a while ago that he has a cell phone number that people regularly text him and tell him, hey, Mr. Former President, this is what's on my mind. What do you think? And he actually spends the time to respond to all of them. I got the number. 0244. Sorry. I want to spare him. He'll get too many text messages. So let's just leave it at that. When you leave Ghana and you go outside of Ghana to other African countries, he is really adored. In my home country, Ghana, it sometimes gets mixed up with local politics. Okay, those who are for his party, those who are against, so it gets muddled. But when you go outside the country, I was in Nigeria recently. Everybody is saying wonderful things about this man. He's a hero of Africa. I was in South Africa. Everybody was saying exactly the same thing. In Ethiopia, almost everywhere you go, he's one of the most admired leaders on the continent of Africa. There are other parts of him which many of you may also not know. So let me bring them up. Conflict resolution, which is something he'll be speaking about today, is something that's close to his heart and has been close to his heart for quite some time. You may all remember the crisis in Liberia. You may have heard of something called ECOMOG, which is the armed forces by the Economic Community of West African States. This man was central to its creation, passionately central to its creation, which ultimately led to peace and tranquility in that very troubled part of Africa. Something else you may also not know. Another part of Africa had a major tragedy. That was Rwanda. And we all know that Rwanda is an example where the entire world community let down very good people. We all should have paid much more attention to what was going on. While we were all looking the other way, when our international institutions were just talking and doing nothing, this man continued to send troops from his country to keep the peace. As others were leaving, he was still championing the cause and telling everybody we should stay. He kept the troops there. I don't know how many lives those troops saved. There weren't that many relative to the crisis that was going on, but it was the passion and concern of one person which kept all of this alive. So you've all seen the CNN video right now. You may not know that after that video, there was heightened awareness in the international community. I know we have many people from Somalia and the Horn of Africa. The world started paying much more attention, essentially after that CNN video that you saw there. People realized that this is an important problem. People should just look at his face, his eyes. You saw him choking in the CNN video there, and people started paying attention. It's his passion, it's his concern that has brought the limelight onto that issue. He's been spending most of today, and will be spending most of tomorrow, talking to the very senior leadership in this country to also pay attention to that particular issue. So as somebody who grew up in Ghana, I'm a little bit younger, so I sort of grew up with him. I'm a little bit nervous. I can't believe I actually have the opportunity to be introducing him here. I'm overdoing it here, okay. So on that note, since my president says I'm overdoing it, could you all please give him a big round of applause? President Jerry John Rawlings. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I found myself sitting in front of some very business-minded lady and gentlemen earlier on today. I believe there must have been some executives who had something to do with the Kuwaiti fund or something. Was it a Kuwaiti fund? And sorry. Yes, Abu Dhabi fund. And they seem more like a business-inclined, institution, and they're not there to receive requests for charitable situations. But I had to think very quickly, how do I convince these business-minded people that Somalia, stopped being an African issue a long time ago and has been an international problem, and the military on the ground are making a lot of progress at great cost to lives, their own, as well as, I guess, what they sometimes call collateral damage from both sides. And with the kind of progress that we're making on the ground and driving them out, there was the need for us to now invest in some of the social needs of the people on the ground. Clinics, schools, water, etc. Make the situation and conditions livable. In other words, can we invest in a program that would consolidate the military gains that have been made on the ground? That should be our political objective. And of course, they see the point in it, but they said they didn't. The decision would have to come from the politicians up there. So I guess we're all going to see the politicians up there. Some of you are the politicians sitting amongst us here, or you're connected to some of them. Please give them a call tonight and impress upon them that it's extremely important that we consolidate the gains. It's been a very difficult task. It's been a very difficult, very complex situation. And there was a time when we'd say that we can see victory at the end of the tunnel, but actually it's tangible now. So it's leading to, what you'll call a bit of power, political infighting and things like that at the political level, in the parliament, etc. But these are the normal human things, and I sincerely hope we'll find a solution as quickly as possible so that the progress that needs to be made on the political front can be synchronized with the military gains. 20 years of suffering in that country has been a very difficult one, and it's a wonder that some of them have survived this long, considering what they've gone through. But even as we're making the gains that I'm talking about, that you probably read about, the Al-Shabaab group are having to reorganize themselves and to fight in a different way. And that is what we call the suicide bombing. There was a time I used to wonder whether we, as Africans, had it in us, to blow ourselves up, as others are doing. And I remember I was asking some of the officials, do they take something? Do they take drugs, etc.? No, actually, there's something that is cultivated in the neighborhood region. And I remember attempting it, Yeah. But I was told categorically by this official that no drugs are involved. Which in effect means, ladies and gentlemen, that we are fighting people, no matter how small the number, who also have what I call the passion or the force of conviction, just as we also have. And that is something we must respect. Ever since I got involved, I've been asking, or rather, I must confess, whenever the speeches are made for me, it doesn't give room or make room for any political discussions with the militant Al-Shabaabs at all. I said no. I understand some aspects of the combative culture, and we must always make room, create an opening for political talk. Because when you shut the door completely, that's when you force people to do things like that. So right now, what we're contending with in Somalia, are suicide bombers. They claimed about 9 lives not too long ago when the European community, or was it a British official, visited the country. I happened to be there too, incidentally. trying to resolve a problem between, in the parliamentary group. Ladies and gentlemen, when I was first given this job, as I was saying earlier, I didn't quite say I would accept it when I heard it announced. And I started asking myself, do people hate me so much, in my country or in the African community or wherever it may be, to push me into a place like Somalia, Anyway, and don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, he was trying to tell you a few things. We went through a revolution, a revolt and a revolution that created a situation where you're loved in a very passionate way by those who are for you and hated equally passionately by those who are against you. So you don't have peace. You're caught between the two, the passions of both, but we're finding our way. But things are complex and difficult in my region, in my country, and if there was time, I would have liked to have talked about things in West Africa. As good as it appears, there are some underlying problems. And these things are covered by the veneer of the Constitution, of constitutional rule. No. So that's when I decided, no, I'll take this thing up, this challenge. And quite frankly, as difficult as it's been equally rewarding, because you run into people, who demonstrate so much resilience. There was, I don't know whether I talked about it on the CNN, about a 5-year-old kid. Yes. And that looked like a 1.5, etc. Which reminds me, I should have found out by now, whether that kid is still alive. However, I had difficulties, staying in the place, because I didn't want to be a drain on the security forces, as I said earlier on today when I was speaking. But what even, I guess, makes it more difficult for me is that, to be given a responsibility like this, that calls for an interaction with the people, how to help stoke and fuel, their defiance to defy what is wrong. If you don't have the capacity, the ability to defy what is wrong, you cannot defend freedom and justice, and the life of a woman in that place, the life of a child in that place, is not something I wanted to see, and I wanted to be on the ground. But there again, that proved to be equally difficult. And I thought, and I was telling my senior colleagues in office that if I'd known that I wasn't going to be there, I would not have accepted this job. I didn't accept it, to stay away from the danger. Ladies and gentlemen, Somalia needs help. I can understand why America washed, her hands off Somalia on account of the Black Hawk incident. I do recall the scenes on TV very well. For those who do not know it, let me play it back to you, or those of us in Africa, how we saw it. We saw equally horrible scenes, children starving, etc. And we're wondering if nobody was going to do anything about it. Thankfully, the US reacted and started flying in emergency food supplies, tons of it. But there again, you had these characters, as I mentioned, who started collecting the food items. And now the world started getting angry and wondering, is nobody going to teach these people a lesson? in order to allow the food to get to the needy ones. And President Bush Sr. was in office then, and some of us probably felt he waited a little too long, but if he had moved a little too early, some would have thought, oh, what's America after? So the US, he had no choice but to wait a little till we got really saturated, you know, with a bit of anger when he moved in. And in trying to deal with it, that's what ended up in the Black Hawk incident. And I guess they could have stayed on and fought it out. But I think seeing, you know, a fellow human being being dragged on a string, a wire, by another, you know, a Somalian dragging an American pilot on the ground, I think must have disgusted them to the extent that they thought, no, let's get out of here, wash our hands off what appears this an uncivilized behavior. And so having to get the US back in here was going to prove to be quite difficult. But fortunately, you know, time had what do you call it, reduced some of the pain, and the US, including others, equally responded. But of course, the other reason that you and I have no choice but to stay involved is that they were doing a lot of economic damage, extensive volumes, in terms of its extension from the land onto the sea, the piracy. And in spite of all the sophisticated equipment, they were getting away with hijacking so many ships and personnel. Fortunately, the world finally decided, you know, to get involved, so it was no longer a question of NATO, USA, Europe, India, everybody got involved, ships all over the place. And now they're finally beginning to contain the situation of piracy out there. We're playing our part on land with very limited resources. And there are times when I wish, you know, some of you Western powers would treat us the way you handle conflict situations in other countries outside of the continent, you know, where you send in, you know, the necessary logistics, the air cover, etc. But when it comes to an African situation, your hands become too short. You can't reach the bottom of your pockets. You see what I mean? Yeah. But I guess now that you're talking about, you know, the huge resources and the oil finds in the place, maybe some of you will begin to show a little more interest than you've done so far. But Chief, if I may tell you something about Rwanda, when a country, you know, is empowered, that's the phrase I always use, like you bring the best out of the people. But I don't know how many of us, not many of us rather, in that kind of position, like to empower the people to the extent that they end up demanding accountability from us. And that in effect means that corruption is minimized. You'd have to lead with integrity. And the point is that, as I keep on saying, when you have a nation like that, united with a sense of purpose, nothing stops them from achieving or doing what is right. And that was the atmosphere in my country when the Rwandan incident was about happening. And many countries just packed up and left, even those of you with your sophisticated machinery and technology. But Ghanaians were prepared to stay. They were a reflection of the new, bold, confident atmosphere back at home. It was not for any adventurous reason, but in a good military institution believes in the cause of justice. And you don't need too much to put them in the way of danger when they believe in the cause. And I do recall that right about that time, the slaughter of one group, ethnic group, had already taken place. And we didn't have that many personnel, but under the direction of the general, they had moved to take care of areas they could secure and protect, which was the hospital. They happened to be there when a few days or so later, now President of Kigali, Kagame, led his troops, across the hospital, met them, and I remember the general said, well, he just looked at us silently, what we're doing, and passed on. Round about that time, ladies and gentlemen, I happened to be in France with my colleague African heads for a meeting with Chirac, the tall one, right. And my fear, my worry was that if nothing was done to contain the advance, there could very easily be a counter-slaughter. And I don't know how many people felt or feel that. Let it be. If they can kill 1 million and get away with it, why shouldn't the others do the same? I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen. I do not agree with that. Put your whole machinery at the disposal of searching for every single one of those characters involved in the slaughter of your fellow human beings. But do not, on account of what took place, leave the door equally open for innocents to also be slaughtered. I don't think that's right. So I remember we were in a bind, in a fix, not knowing what to do, and we didn't seem to have the capacity to deal with it on the continent either. And, out of the blue, this Anglophone man, opens his mouth, and I remember somebody was trying to occupy his attention. As soon as I started, I said, please, I want to talk to the man. And I made it quite clear that, we cannot allow a counter-slaughter. I believe that's all France wanted, that opportunity to despise their troops. So I remember they and the Belgians despised their troops, airborne regiments, etc., and actually blocked any further advance of the Kagame troops. And somehow I was the sole voice. I mean, why others didn't, take it up or back it up or say anything along those lines, I can't quite understand. But, maybe it's because I said it first, so there was no point in anybody else repeating it. But this is what happened. So, ladies and gentlemen, I guess I'm saying this to make you appreciate the fact that, we're not just dealing with an issue of Somalia. Somalia, we can deal with in really a few minutes, but I wish I had 4 hours with you so I could talk about, a few things that we need to know and to understand. I wish we could invite Noam Chomsky and a few others. Because we're the living realities on the ground. In my country today, Can you believe that our political party that was born out of a revolution, out of a revolt and a revolution, had survived for 10 years, and we won 2 additional elections, free and fair elections, you know, after the end of my first 4-year term and the second 4-year term, with hardly any financial support. Because we have the power of conviction and integrity on our side. If I hit the campaign trail, I never promise our people anything. I only promise them more hard work. And the others, after multi-party, oh yes, I was actually railroaded into multi-party democracy. I remember that day very well. The gentleman from the State Department. And I said, well, and if I refuse? He said, well, then all assistance from the IMF and the World Bank will be blocked and things like that. I said, okay. But at that time, I didn't think we had enjoyed so much assistance from them that we had extended electricity from about 25% to about 87% of the country, roads, water, etc. And there was just a little part of the country that was left, my region, where I come from. Normally people concentrate on their regions first, their people first. But my upbringing says, handle those of the needs of the stranger before you take care of your own. Anyway, so we gave in to multi-party. Another reason why we did, because in my country we had tasted, socialism, socialist policies, capitalist policies. We had multi-party democracy, single-party state, coups, counter-coups, none of them were accountable to our people. We had tasted it all. So when this revolt happened, when I say it brought the best out of our people, ladies and gentlemen, believe me, let me just cite one little or 2 little examples just to prove a point. Please don't get bored, sir. Hello, wait for me. Let me land. There was a time when there was a near conflict between a certain unit and those who were around me at the castle. And it looked like if we didn't deflate that tension, it could blow up the following day. And yet, I thought this was solvable, but I didn't know what to do, how to go about it. How do we solve this thing? And yet, the solution seemed to be right underneath our nose. It took me a little time before the night got that dark when it struck me the traditional way of expressing your apology. So I called the warrant officer to take along a few of his men with him to go to the unit and to offer to call on them at 5 o'clock the following day, the coming day. That was all it took to deflate the tension. Because in our tradition, when 5 o'clock, 5:30 is the hour of reverence, is the godly hour that parents, when they want to say something serious to you, wake you up. That moment. This has passed with time, so with it goes some of your integrity till somebody, can recall it as a result of some circumstance or whatever it is, and feed it into the system, and the situation just softens up. Because you mentioned 5:30. Because if they had had to wait for the following day to do it the inherited way of marching in, left, right, yes, sir, I'm sorry, sir, etc. You're not serious. But if you want to, but in handling it the way we did, we penetrated the spirituality of our being. And this is where we appeared to have gone wrong in so many ways, where we are caught in the clash of cultures. When we come to your countries, Anglophone, Francophone, wherever, as black people from Africa, we work as well as you do. We drive obediently, in a disciplined manner. We work just as hard as you do. We talk sense like you do. Why? Because in your Britain, in your America, or in your France, that language has integrity. It has spirituality. The gap between the word and the deed are very narrow. Ladies and gentlemen, you've taken it so much for granted, some of you don't seem to understand what I'm saying. Now, let me see if I can draw the picture for you to understand. Back at home, in our tradition, my language, our language, carries the same integrity and spirituality of your English, your American language in your country. But that language is not used in governmental circles, in the circles of authority, in dealing with the police, the military, the judiciary, this, etc. But so what? Yes, there is something wrong. In adopting the English language, we've left the spirituality, the integrity of our beings in our language behind. You get it? We've left it behind and adopted your language without the spirituality of your language, without the integrity that comes with your language. So we use your language in a superficial way. Meanwhile, it carries so much power that our native folks who have so much intelligence, just because they cannot speak that language, wouldn't be listened to, etc. Ladies and gentlemen, this is just one little example of the extent to which the English language. But of course, when the revolt happened, did I change the language? No, we still spoke English. But a revolt, you know, I think the ethics of man talks about when people cannot find a way and they have to resort to a revolt, then you can count it as being sanctioned by God. Yes. Oh, need to I read those things, you know. Ladies and gentlemen, that revolt brought the best out of our people. Can you imagine that a very serene, godly, priestly-looking gentleman, I've forgotten his name, who used to appear on TV every evening and would give us some fine, sweet words of wisdom in the English language, well-spoken, his diction, etc. This same man was stealing somebody's property, land, in the village, and when the poor villager who couldn't speak his English was asking, why did you do this to me? Can I have my land back? You know what he told him? Take the matter to court. Knowing very well the poor man cannot pay, the poor man cannot go and speak Latin, understand the Latin his lawyer is going to speak, etc., to cost him to have justice. You know, I'm only sharing these little things with you to understand that sometimes we, the so-called academicians or intellectuals, have contributed immensely to some of these problems. When we fashioned our constitution as a result of the revolt, for the first time the constitution said, no, You don't have to you don't have to stay out of parliament just because you cannot speak English. Let's have an interpreter on the ground. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm saying that, you know, there was a friend of mine who attempted to interview a soldier over a combative situation that had taken place and asked me to watch it on TV that night. I watched it, and my soldier did not come out well, didn't come out properly at all. So I said, you know something, Mukhtar? If you had asked him the same question in his native language, you would have heard the wisdom in his head, the compassion in his heart, and he wouldn't have to read it. But that's the point I'm making. There are so many ways in which, you know, we've complicated things for us on our continent, where we've put aside, you know, the integrity in our culture. I have asked priests, Catholic priests, I'm supposed to be a Catholic. I remember when we were trying to baptize our two daughters, and this young, fine priest, you know, said, no, I'll have to bring Christian names, because I was naming my children after, you know, heroines in our country, in Africa. And I asked myself, I mean, look, Christianize me, if you may. I have no problem with it. But don't Westernize me. You see what I mean? I mean, you try to create something. 12 years after we had won our independence under a noble, great person like Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, 12 years later down the line, my wife and I create some piece of impressive artwork. We wanted to secure the patent, and we're told it has to go to the UK, and it'll take about 3 years before it comes, you know, whatever. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to hear some more of my stories, you'll have to invite me on another occasion, and you'll have to pay to enter. No, it's been a very tiring time, but I'm telling you, those 10 years of our leadership, especially the first 10 years, when we didn't have any elaborate constitution in Ghana, it brought the best out of our people. It brought the very best out of our people. You know, there was no ideological, content in the first revolt of 79, and then our return in 82. And if you'll throw your minds back, when we came back in 82, so many countries in West Africa, starting with Suriname and then back to West Africa, so many governments actually fell, collapsed. Nigeria had to survive by changing governments 3 times because our people just wanted justice. Today we've done a little better. There is justice there is freedom in my country, but not much to do with justice. Ladies and gentlemen, you cannot fly a kite high and strong without the string of justice being powerful enough to hold that kite enjoying its freedom up there. But some of these things are there for us to see, to be able to learn from, but persistently we refuse. And now today, Africa is actually being assimilated. Mark it. You can invite me again if you wish. We're being assimilated in the global situation. But if we're doing so with our values intact, I wouldn't have minded. 12 years ago, some of us predicted that we will have an increase in terror activities on our continent. What's going on in Nigeria? Please, you didn't have to be a scholar to see it. Because with the collapse of the bipolar, whatever it is, the manner in which, look at the word capitalism. Nobody would dare talk about it. Now you're talking about it, so it's like the world can also talk about it. Meanwhile, Pope John Paul, who assisted us in bringing down the Eastern Corridor, was the very person who talked about the savagery of capitalism. In your world, you have the machinery to be able to contain it, to deal with it. What's the gentleman, that Frenchman who was arrested in some New York square? Yeah, the IMF gentleman. Yeah. Things like that. I mean, the law at work, or whatever it is. In my continent, in my Accra, or in my Ghana, in my Africa, a big man would get arrested for something like this. It's out of the question. You know? There's so much we get away with. There was a 13-year-old girl that I taught how to fly. A girl. I would have wished she was the daughter of some corporal. And I did it for a political reason, to demonstrate to our people that let's stop looking down on the girl child. Let's stop looking down on our women. Let's give them the appropriate respect. They are just as capable as we are. And that's why I was saying that the day the quality of justice will also improve for womanhood in Africa, then I know that day Africa is truly up and on the march. Yes. It's a day I'm looking forward to. What I saw in Somalia was painful. It was extremely painful. There's another place. No. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. What can I tell you that you do not already know about when it comes to Somalia? One only need to open any major newspaper, and almost on a daily basis, something is written about the humanitarian crisis that is playing itself out across the Horn of Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, I can best describe the situation in Somalia as an intense drama that has great potential to end in tragedy or in good fortune. Since the alarm was raised in mid-2011 of the dire situation in the Horn of Africa, particularly Somalia, the international community has shown overwhelming support for the situation, contributing millions in cash and kind to alleviate the situation. The United Nations improved the status of the farming in Somalia recently, and that is due to the contributions of countries around the world and the United Arab Emirates. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, there is more to the issue of food security across the world. The world has survived a food crisis that reared its head in 2007 to 2008. Unfortunately, as you and I know, many of them did not survive it in those spotted areas. Since I started addressing you, approximately 30 children, no, considering how long I took, you can multiply it by maybe 5 or 10. Approximately 30 children somewhere have died of hunger, and by the time I finished, 300 would have died, multiplied by another 6, 7, or 10. And by this time next year, 6 million more children will be dead due to hunger around the world. This silent horror is happening right now, despite the fact that there is indeed enough food to feed the world. Ladies and gentlemen, the point I was trying to make at that time is that your institutions are strong enough to hold in check. And your institutions can even derive power from the judicial consciousness of your population, the intolerant mood of your people, of that which is absolutely crass. But ladies and gentlemen, in our situation, we're not just dealing with capitalism, we're dealing with blatant fraud and corruption. State machineries using the apparatus to subdue and subjugate its people. I remember when September 11th happened and the US, felt so sad and angry at the same time. We all sympathized with her. But I did not hesitate to tell them that now you seem to know and understand what terrorism is like. In Africa, we've been living under terrorist regimes for decades. Yes. Pardon me. Sometimes these readable things torment my life. Ladies and gentlemen, as I was saying, the silent horror is happening right now despite the fact that there is indeed enough food to feed the world. Research has demonstrated that hunger in modern times is not typically the product of a lack of food, but rather that hunger usually arises from problems in food distribution networks or from governmental policies in the development world. As I speak, we're experiencing a second global crisis that was also partly responsible for the Arab awakening that spread across the Middle East and North Africa since 18 December 2010. Ladies and gentlemen, please. You talk about great heavy investment. What amount of investment didn't you put into Egypt, into Tunisia? Gaddafi is something different. He provided for the needs of his people, but even the Bible says that man shall not live by bread alone. So he should have recognized, the power of the quest for the right to, the dignity of asserting the right of your individuality. But talking about Tunisia, for instance, and Egypt, how much did you not invest? Have we not, has the world not invested in Egypt and Muslim? So, why did this happen? Ladies and gentlemen, and that's how I want you to also begin to understand the African situation. It appears that even as we're making these heavy investments, building this infrastructure, and the place beginning to look like a city, like your Western countries, is it at the expense of something? Yes. It's at the expense of something. You remove your governments on the basis of economic flight in the US, Britain, Europe, etc. But in Africa, we remove governments because of excessive corruption and oppression. That's the difference. Meanwhile, you sit over there and you equate the circumstances of removal to be the same. Ladies and gentlemen, why have you had a situation like this in Egypt in spite of such a modernized look in Cairo and other parts of Egypt? Have we gone about the investment, the development programs at the expense of freedom and justice? Yes. tradition. University student simply wants to sell vegetables. Granting the person a license is even a problem for universities to sell vegetables. Meanwhile, look at the machinery that was in place that was preventing this young man from, yes, living a normal life. Take a look at it. What has happened is that coups have become unfashionable. We're not interested in coups anymore. So somehow or the other, we've ended up in a situation where we never did, and we're still not giving voice to the opposition in Parliament anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, so where then lies the check and the checks and the balance? Governments in power terrorize the judiciary till they are in absolute control of the judiciary. Ladies and gentlemen, research has demonstrated that, yes, hunger and so and so. And to top it all, ladies and gentlemen, the world is experiencing a global financial crisis of immense proportions. Earlier this week, it was reported that the UN and IMF predict that growth in developed capitalist countries will be 1.2 to 1.3% only, amidst very high unemployment and extreme income inequalities. They also revealed that countries like China and India now face economic slowdown, countries which have been the locomotive of the global economy, especially since the financial crisis of 2008. Ladies and gentlemen, we have responsibility as business people, as academics, and chosen leaders of our countries to champion the cause of global equality in food distribution. About 18 months ago, the international community recognized the developing humanitarian disaster in the Horn of Africa and began to move resources around the region. However, the wheels turned slowly. Then suddenly, on 20th July 2011, the UN declared several parts of Somalia a famine zone. As reported in the media, exhausted, rail-thin women were stumbling into refugee camps in Kenya and Ethiopia with dead babies and bleeding feet. It is estimated that between 50,000 and 100,000 people, mainly babies and children, lost their lives within the short space of 6 months. Only when the world was exposed to the horrific drama unfolding across the Horn of Africa, and especially through visual proof, that action became the key word. Despite an announcement by the UN last week that the famine is over, it is estimated, ladies and gentlemen, that a further $1.5 billion is required to prevent the situation from returning to the state of famine. Yes, and that is very true, ladies and gentlemen. To try and illustrate the enormity of the problem, Cargill, the Minnesota-based producer and marketer of food, agricultural, financial, and industrial products, recently donated 10,000 metric tons of rice to WFP USA to be distributed in the Horn of Africa. The group said the donation, the largest ever food donation to WFP USA, would feed nearly 1 million people for a month. The need is to feed between 2.3 to 9.5 million people across the Horn of Africa for the rest of this year. The enormous donation above is therefore just a drop in the ocean. Quite substantial from one company, though, and we're grateful to them. More than 2.3 million Somalis, almost one-third of the population, are still in need of aid, and across the Horn of Africa region, a staggering 9.5 million people still need help. Famine is expected to return to the region in the next 100 days if substantial aid cannot be raised in time. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no doubt that short-term aid alone does not provide a guarantee for long-term and sustainable solutions for the region and Somalia specifically. What is crystal clear, however, is that the absence of short-term aid to halt and turn this humanitarian crisis around will frustrate the implementation of longer-term solutions that will ensure food security and prosperity for millions in the region. The most important issues related to food security in Somalia and the Horn of Africa are security, the political process, counterterrorism, piracy, local stability, humanitarian, and international coordination. There is no doubt that conflict and insecurity has a major impact on food security. Somalia, ravaged by nearly uninterrupted civil war for the past 2 decades, is one of the most dangerous places in the world for aid workers and one of the regions that needs them most at the same time. Restoring security in Somalia is very high on the agenda, and we've chalked a fair amount of success. Ladies and gentlemen, without security, aid efforts will be threatened and the humanitarian situation could turn into another crisis. Without security, development will be a pipe dream. Without security, stability as foundation for a prosperous Somalia will turn into quicksand. Recent advances in the security situation in Somalia by the joint efforts of the African Union Mission and the forces of the transitional federal government are very promising. However, as stated by the president of Puntland State of Somalia at the just ended 21st meeting of the International Contact Group on Somalia in Djibouti City, security remains precarious in Somalia as a whole, and more particularly in Mogadishu and the South Central regions. Ladies and gentlemen, in order to establish the required security and stability, it will be necessary that the United Nations Security Council approves the strengthening of the AMISOM forces from its current level of 12,000 to the requested level of 17,700. The international community is urged to support the process through the provision of force enablers and other important logistics, such as reconnaissance helicopters, to make the role of AMISOM and TFG more efficient. It has been done in Afghanistan and repeated last year in Cote d'Ivoire. So there is no reason, ladies and gentlemen, why it cannot be done in Somalia. Ladies and gentlemen, once security has been ensured in Somalia, the next essential factor will be to also ensure food security and a stable and democratically elected government in Somalia that will formulate and implement the right policies. The next 6 months are critical towards achieving this end. The mandate of the transitional federal government in Somalia is to formulate a new constitution for Somalia, and this, which was to formulate a new constitution for Somalia, was extended last August by another year. It is clear also that the international community will not tolerate any further extensions of this deadline. Somalia has gone through different forms of political transition for the past 20 years, and the international community, as well as Somalis, are asking what the future holds and whether the leaders will deliver on the promises of the transitional federal charter. The Djibouti Agreement, the Kampala Accord, the roadmap, and most recently, the Garowe Principles. I wouldn't go off the cuff again. Okay, I'll stick to the, the papers. I have, over the past 1 month, traveled to Mogadishu twice and held several meetings in Somalia and Kenya to resolve a crisis in the transitional federal parliament that has the potential of stalling the peace process. At the last International Contact Group meeting in Djibouti, I made it clear that as facilitators of the peace process, we will continue to impress on those who have made attempts to stall the process to allow sanity to prevail so the axe of sanctions does not fall on our heads. This concern is shared by the international community, and never has there been a more critical time for the people of Somalia to resolve their differences and unite them back on a journey towards peace, stability, and progress for the country and its entire people. Once Somalia, with the continued support of the international community, has managed to create a secure and stable environment led by a legitimate, accountable, and committed government, the third critical factor will be the establishment of food security policies that will include sufficient investment in both agriculture and agricultural research. In November 2009, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa and the New Partnership for Africa's Development launched a partnership to collaborate on achieving an African Green Revolution and the goals set by the Comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program. Through the program, African governments committed to allocating at least 10% of their national budgets to agriculture in pursuit of 6% annual agricultural growth. Given the situation in Somalia, a much higher investment than 10% of national budget may be required. And yet again, the commitment by the international community towards this goal will be essential. The security, I can see him from the periphery of my ears. Sorry, Chief. The security situation in Somalia has led to total underinvestment in both agricultural development and research. And it is hoped that both the government of Somalia and the international community will regard this as a top priority on their development agenda. An essential part of Somalia's food security policy must include the establishment of programs to protect the vulnerable, especially children and women, from rising food prices and shortages. The situation that developed in Somalia could have been managed and must be managed in the future to prevent the occurrence of another humanitarian crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, other issues necessary to return normality to Somalia include the issue of piracy and crime. Poverty and unemployment plays a major role in driving the youth to engage in such practices. The economic reconstruction and development of Somalia, including massive foreign investment, will hopefully be an automatic result of a secure and stable Somalia that will lead to job creation and prosperity for all. Take my word for it, those people are very hardworking. Ladies and gentlemen, the dramatic improvement in the welfare of Mozambique following peace is a prime example of what can and should happen in Somalia. There is little doubt that Somalia and subsequently the region across the Horn of Africa face a bright future. Somalia is endowed with people that are hungry for an end to 20 years of conflict. People who are ready to embrace peace, reconstruction, development, and prosperity. Somalia is also endowed with vast mineral and oil resources that have as yet to be exploited and put to use to help build the much-needed prosperity for the people. If the international community can walk the last mile with Somalia, then the prospect for peace and stability can be guaranteed and do not be left out of those who must walk the last mile with them. The UN might have revoked the status of famine in Somalia, but the situation is far from stable, and further and consistent humanitarian aid is required to stabilize food security and sow confidence, particularly among Somalia, in areas liberated by AMISOM and the transitional forces. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, before I conclude, allow me to commend the League of Arab States for its decision to host an extraordinary meeting on February 19th to discuss the latest developments in Somalia and seek a coordinated position ahead of the much talked about London Conference on Somalia to be hosted by the UK government on February 23rd. The international community needs to go into the London Conference with a clear and defined agenda to bolster the final stages of the Somali roadmap so that by August this year, there is a new phase of political leadership and governance in Somalia that inspires confidence and gives real meaning to the sacrifices by troops of the AMISOM and the TFG who have laid down their lives to liberate large areas of Somalia. We have to join hands to finally turning the tragedy of Somalia into a story of hope, peace, success, and development. I wish to express my gratitude to the Center for Technology and Development, Dr. Yao and his colleagues, to the beautiful people of this country, the government, for offering us this opportunity, to be part of such an inspiring conference. I thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
My name is Shakur. I'm from the university. I just wanted to thank President Rawlings for his role in trying to help the famine in Somalia. That was much appreciated by most of the Somalis. The two quick questions that I have, as being the representative for the African Union, have you tried to solve the problems between the IGAD states and between the various conflicting powers in Africa with regard to solving the Somalia's problem? Second question is, as you mentioned at the London conference, the British government, thankfully I must say, has just developed a great passion for Somalia after 20 years. And we are skeptical about what is going on because we're yet to hear that the integrity and the territorial integrity of Somalia will be intact after the conference in London. So, Mr. President, what is your take on these two issues? Thank you very much.
As far as the second one is concerned, I believe I did allude to it in my speech, what is expected of all of us as we head towards the London conference. But let's give them the benefit of the doubt that they mean well, because 20 years and all this transitional existence is beginning to bother some of them. The public of UK did contribute a lot, so did the government, and I believe the current mandate ends in August or thereabouts. So there is obviously a bit of concern and a sense of desperation. What next? Quite frankly, even if I had a what next on my chest, or if they did, I wouldn't advise that we put it on the table at all. Because the minute we begin to sound that way, ways and means are found for the transition to continue. So that's the little comment I would like to make on this issue. The first one was to do with just...
Conflict within
Africa. Correct, Chief. Chief, as I stand here, what I can say is that, yes, they may have little differences about how to approach certain issues, because some of them have suffered in various degrees, over a period of time. And as a result, may appear to have other motives outside of what is generally expected, of the objective. So here again, I can assure you that we're doing our possible best to make sure that if we don't do it even in public, in private, we put all our cards on the table so that our approach to the Somalian situation remains as transparent as possible. Because without it, to be quite honest, the Somalians themselves will take advantage of it, and you'd be heading somewhere else altogether again. So I think it's important, and we've recognized and they've realized that there's the need for them to be on the same page or the same chapter all the time in dealing with the Somalian situation. That is how much I can say for now, Chief.
It's very nice to see someone still talking about Somalia after all these years and decades. My question, Mr. President, is you said that the security is the most important thing in Somalia. So what we can do about this security? Because as you said, this famine can come again within 1 month. Because you see the security there in Somalia, there is no security at all. So what we can do as a nation only to provide this from happening again? Thank you.
Madam, I think, we could have made a lot more progress than we've made so far if we had had many more troops on the ground and the complementary military were to go with it. But it's been this slow and this difficult because we haven't had the right number and the appropriate air cover. But nonetheless, as we're speaking right now, since the Kenyans also came on board, and Ethiopians also to some extent, Djibouti, etc., we've made a great deal of advance. What is now disturbing really is how to consolidate, how to put in place social programs in the liberated areas, okay? However, the issue that is still bothering all of us is how do you find a solution? How do you put a stop? How do you convince people to give a political opening, to enable us dialogue instead of having to engage in the suicide bombing? How can you stop somebody who wants to kill his own life, if you understand what I'm saying? As far as security, the geographical, area, the landscape that has been achieved by AMISOM is tremendous. And it's going to get better and better. But will it correspond to more suicide bombings? I don't know. Let us hope for the best. That is not to say that Africa does not have certain vulnerabilities. I don't want to be too specific. We're quite vulnerable by virtue of our pattern of behavior and our social patterns of behavior. Yes. So others may want to take advantage of it, but please don't try and read up. We're probably not getting the information out there as efficiently as others do. But take my word for it, the African troops have done a lot, and we'll have to congratulate them, okay? We'll try, there must be a place where we can send some of the actual reports, the factual reports of progress that is being made. Thank you. Yes.
So we're going to have to conclude now because it's really late, and I know we have some mothers and children who have to get on the bus. Mr. President, you should know that the Somali community came out in force for you. They've been looking forward to this event for a while. And I should also remark, you see the Ghana flags there, the Ghanaian community. That's right, go Ghana, okay? They're also here in force for you. We have a reception in the back, and so Mr. President, I don't know if you have some free time. A lot of people would like to talk to you. And everybody, I'd like you to know that His Excellency has flown in straight from Accra, Ghana. He got in today at about 6 a.m. He's been busy throughout meetings, our conference and outside meetings. So he really cares about this, and all of us here at NYU Abu Dhabi are extremely grateful for your commitment and for coming all the way just to grace our activities with your presence. So please, a big round of applause for His Excellency.
Thank you. And for the little girls, for your music in exchange, let me give you what we sound like in West Africa. Kiglimata watu fo lahonya gowe. Wait. Kiglimata watu fo lahonya gowe. Kasok bona kliko krr kataki teki kakaki teki.